Welcome. Welcome to today's webinar on how to capture an airport, the story of how InView Assets completed a drone map survey of Bristol Airport. David Holmes is going to take us through the topic, looking in detail at how they have proceeded on this and why. We are delighted to have David here, and he is going to take over. Lovely.
Okay, thank you for that. Welcome everyone. Great to have so many of you here and joining us. I think this will be run for about 30 minutes or so. I can't promise exactly how long it is. As you said, we'll make sure we get the PDF to you of the presentation if that's useful for you, and I think we can offer a re-recording as well. So my name's David Holmes. I'm the founder and one of the directors of InView Assets. We are a data capture company based in southwest England. And we're delighted to sort of talk you through warts and all, in fact, about our experiences of working at a big regional airport when it's live and when it's operational in terms of data collection. So we're going to try and do sort of three things in this session. To talk about the context of the airport and why they wanted to get us involved in terms of aerial data capture, what were their deliverables they were looking for, the specific permissions and operational elements of working in a live airport as well, and that will be kind of going into the nuts and bolts of that. I don't know everything about that. I've consulted quite widely with our kind of chief pilot and some of the procedures he had. So hopefully that will fill you in on some of the details as well. But critically about lessons learned and future work. What would we do if we did this again differently, and how does that work? So I'm going to start off with part one, which is the sort of use case for the airport for the digital data. And what do they want, and why would they want us to get involved in that? So this is a little bit of context about the airport and what their deliverables were that they were after. So I think one of the things to introduce about the airport is I would say they are innovators in terms of their technological viewpoint. And Andrew Goodenough, who we worked with quite closely on this project, who's part of the senior management at the airport, is infrastructure director. And really, he was keen in instigating and trusting us to be able to do this piece of work. And he felt that our technology would ultimately save the airport money, would be quicker and safer and more efficient. And he felt that we could kind of disrupt their traditional workflows, particularly in terms of those aspects of surveying that they might normally use ground-based work for. So let me tell you a little bit more about the airport itself, because I think that's quite an important context for this. So Bristol Airport is one of the largest regional airports. At the moment, it has about 10.5 million passengers go through it. It's got big plans for growth in the next 5 years, up to, I think, about 15 million passengers. And it's the 8th busiest airport in the UK. So outside of those large airports that you know in terms of, in the southeast, this is a big airport. It's not dissimilar in size in terms of, I think, airplane movements to places like Birmingham. It's owned at the moment by Ontario's teachers' pension plan, for your interest. But interestingly, its mix of aircraft is perhaps a little bit more unusual in that it's got a shortish runway, and at the moment they don't offer any long haul. So most of the aircraft that are operating out of here are short haul European, and it's a mixture of EasyJet, Ryanair and Jet2 and a little bit of TUI as well. However, there is a move to try and extend the range of the airport in terms of where it serves and operates, as far as I understand, particularly looking towards the Middle East and the USA. And that may coincide with an increase in the length of the runway as well. So let's just give you a little bit of an overview geographically of what the airport looks like. The main runway runs east-west pretty much, and then the taxiways are to the north of the runway, so that's over here. And then we've got these two areas here, which are the what we call the aprons. Those of you not involved in airports will say that's where the planes park. So there's an east and a west apron, and in the centre it's separated by an area where there's a fuel depot as well. So all the fuel is tankered into the airport. And there is a sort of a walkway which comes from the terminal to the stands where the planes park. There's no air bridges, so everyone is going up steps into the aircraft as well. It's pretty busy. Last year, I think the website reports had around 80,000 aircraft movements, and the whole site is round about 190 hectares. That's the bit that we've surveyed, so the part that you're looking up here. I'm not including all of the airport hotels and the car park and things like that. So that's roughly how large it is. So a little bit more about us and the context of this particular piece of work. One of the things we are, and I think you might find this a bit unusual, us presenting for ARPAS and saying this, but we don't advertise ourselves as a drone company. We are a data capture company. We certainly use drones as part of our toolkit of techniques that we use to capture data, but we use ground-based laser scanning as well. We use SLR photography. So we're sort of specialists in, I suppose, photogrammetry and producing outputs from that, including point clouds and terrain models and all of those sorts of things. And I think this is important, this discussion with the client, because there are all sorts of perhaps sometimes negative connotations that are associated with drones, and we need to allay the fears around those and talk more widely really about data capture in general and the quality of that. So for the client, they are very much interested in the data that you get and the deliverables. Now, at an airport, they are obviously interested in how the drone operates because there are perceptions around risk and safety with it. But normally when we're talking to clients, we talk a lot about data and deliverables rather than saying we use a drone to capture things and like that. That's very, very important. So a little bit of a narrative around how we got the work, because I think this is quite important, particularly those folks who might be drone pilots on this listening to this. Partly this job was by chance. So we're members of Somerset Chamber of Commerce. I think in 2022 we went to an event that was hosted at the airport, and we happened to meet Andrew, who was 𝗷𝗫𝗄𝗏, who was delivering the talk there and was talking about airport expansion. We managed to get a few words in his ear afterwards saying, you know, how we're a great company, we can do all sorts of things for you. And then basically nothing happened. We put it on the back burner and thought we'd never hear from Bristol Airport again. And then round about sort of a year ago from now, we got, a year from where we are at the moment, we got a phone call. I was driving to a different job and it was Andrew, and he said, can you come and do some work for us? And that triggered a chain of events about working at the airport, which is what I'm going to talk you through. And we then went on to talk about deliverables and things like that. So critically, this is what the airport wanted. They wanted a survey grade topo or landscape map of all hard surfaces. That was the aprons and the runways and the taxiways, and it was split into two components. We did the aprons first of all in March last year, and then we did the runway and the taxiways in the middle of June last year. And that was to help. Their use case for that was they didn't have a topo of it, but it was also to help up with repainting the stands where they park the airport. But also, they also wanted, and we were able to give them, a high precision 3D reality twin. It's like a 3D model of the airport that existed on the cloud that would be their single source of truth that they could go to talk to contractors about progress of works. It's obviously a precision model which has georeferencing in it, so you can get distances and areas and things like that. So it's their kind of go-to for things, and they felt that there was a lot of value in this alongside a normal topo, which could have been done from ground surveys, but obviously you get this as the added benefit of the work with the drone. So there are lots of sort of challenges and opportunities when you talk with clients about things. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but essentially any large asset owner has incomplete information, and what we're trying to do with our data capture is give a better understanding of what those assets are so that they can make better decisions. So that was really how this whole thing was sold on this. So let's look more importantly, and this is getting into the nuts and bolts and kind of diving into the nitty-gritty about how did we actually do this. So we've got the job order. They want us to do the work. So what do we then do in order to collect the data working at this large regional airport? What do we have to do? So the first thing we talk about is how we work. And we talk about ourselves as being really kind of quite disruptive in terms of the technology. And that's really important to get them understanding how we work and what we're likely to be doing on site. So we can talk about expectations and things like that. And we need to reassure people about safety and sustainability and all of those sorts of things as well. And there are, in addition to that, lots of what I would call sector challenges that need to be addressed. So these are typical things that you might get asked or that people have unconscious bias around. So for instance, people might say you can't fly a drone at the airport, full stop, or we don't trust data from drones. It's not as good as a surveyor who's doing it on the ground, or my mate's got a drone and we'll do this for 150 quid. All of these sorts of things need to be managed and negotiated with the client. And the other thing, of course, is that we are operating at a live airport. They're not shutting the airport for us to operate. We have to manage our operations within their airspace. So that's really important to have that conversation and to overcome some of these negative things that might be said as well. So I'm going to talk you through the planning, which I've split into sort of shorter term and longer term. And we basically got this job about 3 weeks before we were asked to do it, which was we were up against the wall in terms of planning this, along with our other jobs as well, other work as well. So there are a lot of things that need to be thought of, and I would have thought across most commercial airports of this scale, they would be very common. So there are things like ID passes and ID checks and contractor training that you need to do to be able to get on side and work airside. There's lots of permissions from CAA, etc. There is also the planning of the work, chunking the work so that you understand how long it's going to take, how you're going to do it, working with the client around the order that they might want that work done, and the technicalities of whether we're flying this in a 𝗃 or a 𝗏 and all of those sorts of things. Then you need to price the work internally, and we used outsourced suppliers for doing some of our CAD work as well. So how long are they going to take and how much are they going to cost? You need to agree things like coordinate systems for data as well. We always work in OSGB 1936 as well. And then you get down to things like initial conversations with the airside ops team about how this is going to work. And then they tell you they want £50 million worth of insurance for your drone and you've only got 10. So there's lots and lots of complications around that. And then you've got to sort out accommodation for staff and all sorts of other sort of logistical elements. So there's a lot that comes together early on. In terms of planning this, I quite like spreadsheets and things like that. What we did is we chunked this into areas that were roundabout between 5 and 10,000 square meters, the entire airport. This is the example for the West Apron. We had an idea of how much data that would be, how long it would take us to capture, and how many images it would be. And that allowed us to sort of build a spreadsheet to work out how long each area would take. And obviously, we've got lots of quality checking and things like that. So planning this sort of operation needs to be done at a granular level, particularly in terms of when you're thinking about data capture, and that obviously needs to be shared with the clients as well. And then you go on to short-term planning. Well, the short-term planning again is as important. So there are things around liaison with airside ops, the tower, NATs. Critically, we printed out paper maps of all of our site as well to make sure that we were we were able to mark things up on bits of paper. Although we're a technology company, we like bits of paper as well. We've got contingency planning around weather. We've got to check all of our kit works, our RTK, because there's loads of radio interference at airports. So we did some flight tests near the airport to do that. We looked at what the backup data and storage was. Obviously, we supplied the RAMs. We thought we were going to have to unlock our drones, DJI drones, but we didn't have to in the end because DJI had lifted that by the time we had the flight as well. And then you've got things like assigning staff roles and even things like staff parking and access to airside as well. So all of those things need to be thought of and planned ahead. And then in terms of the actual safety elements that you've got, obviously we're flying in a controlled airspace. So we had to work with the airport to talk about the NOTAMs that we were going to be using. And then when we were operating at the airport itself, then this is the sort of approach that we use. And again, this was negotiated with the tower and with airside ops, exactly how this would work. So we were operating for all of this work under PDRA 01. Although we have an operational safety case, an OSC, we didn't use it for this work. And the reason is that we were not overflying people or aircraft critically that were not under our control at this point. So the only people who were in proximity to us when we were flying would have been our own team and the airport ops team, who obviously we had inducted in our drone safety as well. And all the time we're operating at the airport, we have an escort and someone who is connected by radio to the tower. So we're always under control of the airfield. So whenever we actually take off the drone, we fly the drone, we get permission from the tower to commence that flight. We give the tower an approximate flight time. So we can say we're going to estimate this is 8 minutes in the air. They give us permission to take off. We take off, and then we let the tower know again when we're back on the ground. And at all times, the tower can see where we're operating as well, because of the obviously how we were operating at the airport. The other, I think, particularly important part of the sort of the safety setup for this, and again, this was negotiated with the airfield. A horizontal geofence, which we altered for different locations in each flight, and that could typically be as low as 20 or 30 meters for some narrow strips, or it might have been 100 meters or so in other areas as well. And that was based on our kind of work that we'd done, you can see it on the bottom of the screen there, of chunking these areas up in Google Maps to be able to do that. The RAMs that we normally use Drone Desk for our RAMs, which we did for this. But we also produced some additional supplementary RAMs for this particular job, because we had to also think about additional risks that were specific to this environment, particularly the FOD, the foreign object debris, and jet and rotor wash and things like that. And our normal workflow, for instance, might have been to put ground control points on the ground, and clearly in an operational airport we can't do that. So all of our markings were sprayed with temporary spray rather than putting any objects onto the apron itself. The typical operational day was quite long, and in some instances we sort of, I think all of us felt that it was it required a lot of waiting around. We did two different pieces of work at the airport. We did the aprons early in, as I said, in late March, early April last year, and then we did the runway and the taxiways in the middle of the summer. So this is a photograph of our chief pilot, Mark, here. He's on the runway there at around about 4:30 in the morning. So it's on one of the longest days of the year. And we have control of the, we don't have control of the airport. We have the airport designated to our work. And this piece of work, we were allowed to use the runway from 4:30 until 5:45 in the morning, where the first flights were taking off around about 6 o'clock. So we negotiated with the tower that we would have that time. So you can see there's a lot of sort of, you need to be at the airport early. You had to be there at 4 in the morning, go through the kind of customs checks, airside checks, all of those sorts of things. And then once you've done that piece of work, you might go and have a cup of tea, and then you get to fly on another part of the airport, and that was sort of negotiated. And the different bits of the airport require different sort of sensitivities. So clearly the area I've got on my map here, which is in red, is the runway itself and the direct taxiways. And then we've got an area sort of in orange or brown up here, and then obviously the yellow area, which is the aprons. Now the aprons were relatively straightforward to manage, but when you get to the taxiways and the live area of the runway, it depends on which way the planes are taking off, whether they're on easterlies or westerlies, as to which parts of the taxiway we might be able to capture. So for instance, if the planes were landing from sort of left to right on, I think that's easterlies, so from where my cursor is there going in that direction, they would be taxiing off at this end of the runway, on the east end of the runway, and they would go up and parking. And that means we might be able to fly an area there on that part of the taxiway, because that bit is safe to use. And again, this was all negotiated with the tower. We're not saying where we want to fly, we're giving them an idea of that, but the tower is giving us permission. So working closely with the tower and the airside ops teams was absolutely critical for this, to maintain those aspects of safety. But as I said before, there was a lot of waiting around and being patient, and having cups of tea, really. One of the practicalities of this was doing the apron. This is the top map you've got here, the photo. That's a photo actually in lockdown, I think, but it's the Google Earth image of that part of the apron, the West Apron. When we did it, there's no planes on it. Now, we did it in lots of sections, so this is an ortho photo, stitched together, but the reason there's no planes on it is because they're all parking on the other apron. So one of the things that we sort of worked out with the tower and with airside ops is, when is the airport quiet? And there's a window of quietness at the airport, even in the summer, really between about 10 and 12. It's a base for EasyJet and Ryanair, so lots of flights go out between 6 and 8 in the morning, and they're not returning till about midday. So there's a quieter period when the airport has much lower frequencies of takeoffs and landings, and that meant that we could kind of control and work with the tower, that sort of area that we were going to capture and survey. Not only are we capturing photos, remember, we've got to georeference all of this because we're a surveying company at the end of the day, or we're a team of ground surveyors. We collected in total, I think, around about 200 ground control sites across the entire airport, not obviously in one day. It was done over a series of days. And we use the 𝗚𝘂𝘇 RS3s for this. We like that kit, we like that technology, how it works. We validated our data with a surveyor using Trimble kit as well, to add an extra level of kind of security around our data collection. We also use RIC's best practice on this, so they advise that when you're using GNSS RTK, that you should leave a gap of between your observations of 20 minutes and go and do repeat observations because of changes in the satellite. So all of this sort of thing, we're working with the client to make sure that we can get the best quality data, and obviously all of that is backed up in the cloud as well. And we have a series of workflows that we insist our subcontractors use in order to get quality data capture, because the ground control points are as important as the rest of the survey to georeference all of this as well. So third part of our presentation, reasonably briefly, what are the kind of outputs and lessons learned, and then we can move on to some questions if you've got them. So what our client doesn't want is this. They don't want loads of photographs. They're not interested in images. They're interested in the deliverables that we agreed on at the start of the project. So we don't talk about photographs, even though our data is built around those photographs. We need to put it in and package it into a format that they can understand. And part of that conversation is working out how they're going to access that data and that information. Now, we work with different external cloud suppliers. People like 𝗂𝗄 you may have heard of, or 13D. In this instance, we went with TrendSpec because of the profile of this particular piece of work. As a hosting platform, it's got lots and lots of security attached to it as well, and that was what the client wanted. So all of the 3D models are hosted on TrendSpec as an output. But let's just talk about the amount of data. So this gives you an example of how much there is associated with that airport capture. So there's around about 650 gig of data. This is pretty much all photos, and that equates to around about 250,000 images for that piece of work. So what you've got to do as an operator is kind of not burden the client with all of this, but make sure that they understand the volume of data here, and if they want to get access to it, how they're going to store it, and all of those sorts of things as well. That's really important. So there's our topo output. We didn't fly all of that area of the airport. There's an area to the north here, which is where all the car parks are, and they're doing a lot of redevelopment work. We built our topo into the existing topo. This was Part of this work was outsourced to a third-party company which we work with, and they understand our data capture and things like that. But there's a lot of data on there. It's a big old topo file. And then the second output that the client wanted, remember, is a 3D precision reality model. These are a couple of screenshots from TrendSpec. You can do various things in this platform, like measure areas, look for deflection. That's what these colors are here. You can inspect, if you wanted to, with the level of resolution, every individual light on here. We were flying this typically at around about 20 meters height altitude, something like that, for the apron and the runway itself as well. As I said before, all done in Nadir. There were places where we flew a bit higher, around about 25 meters, because of flood lighting and buildings. But that would be our typical height for this level of resolution. It's all done with an M300 and a P1 camera, 35mm lens. So a couple of slides just to finish on, really, which is, I think, if you're looking at working with a supplier doing a piece of work like this, then there's some sort of considerations that the supplier needs to know about as well. So this is complex to price. Okay, we based it on a day rate, but we knew that this piece of work would take typically 1.5 to 2 times longer than our usual jobs that we would have, because of waiting around as well. Delivery dates need to be really firmly agreed between the capture partner and the client as well. You may find, as we did, that £50 million public liability is difficult to get as a drone operator. You've got to really hunt around for that as well. You must ensure your data is good quality, and you've got to make sure that you maintain dialogue between all different parties at all parts of the stage of from kind of commissioning through to delivery as well. We used local Airbnbs, which was really key in this for our staff team, so that they could actually go back in the middle of the day if they needed to as well. And it also allowed us kind of an office space for checking the data integrity as well at the end of each day as well. And then there are also considerations about who's storing data long term for you as well. And if you're a supplier of this data, are you going to charge for it, and how's that going to work? In terms of the sort of operational considerations, there's loads of moving parts working at an airfield. Fundamentally, I would say that an airfield is a really safe, controlled space, and it's great for flying a drone in. But there are lots of moving parts. So there's permissions, there's weather, there's staffing, there's safety equipment. You need to be in contact as an operator with the local police and with border force. You need to understand vehicle movements around airports, who has priority. Big planes always have priority, I didn't know this, over everything else that moves at an airfield. So if they've got their red light flashing on the top of the aircraft or underneath it, that means they're either moving or about to move, and you stay well clear of it as well. We did not have any authority to overfly any aircraft or any people who weren't under our control as well. And you need to understand a little bit about airport zoning and things like that. And just the special thing about Bristol is that there are really sort of multiple airports within the airport. So there is a section where there are helicopters owned by National Grid, and they seem to operate differently to the airfield itself. There's another section where there are private aircraft as well. And you just need to understand all of the kind of the cogs in the wheel, as it were, of how these things operate as well. And the final thing is, you know, if you're going to do this, you got to expect quite a lot of hanging around, because there are lots of things that stop you flying your drone at that time. So look, in conclusions, I'm sorry, my bottom of my comment has dropped off the end of the slide, but I would say that this project has securely demonstrated that it's possible to capture aerial data safely and effectively at a large or busy regional airport while it's still operating. And I think if we're a testament to that, we're going back in a couple of weeks to do some more work there, and we've got some more work with them in the summer as well. So I think Bristol Airport understand what we do and how we rock, and we're now much more confident about the procedures that we put in place in order to be able to fly there, whether it's the winter months or whether it's the busy summer months as well. So there's lots of things you need to sort of think about here about building up client trust. You are selling an innovative product. You've got to think about risk mitigation. You've got to sell the kind of data-driven decision making as well, and the sustainability aspects to this, and clearly collaboration and communication are critical as well. So look, I think I've done about my 25-30 minutes or so. I don't have any more slides. I guess we open it up now, do we, Eleanor, to anyone who might have a few questions about what it is. I appreciate I've gone quite quickly. But
I would say so. But that's absolutely fine, David. In the very first instance, thank you, because that was absolutely fascinating. I think you've taken us on a really good tour of what people need to consider, whether you're commissioning the work or equally if you're going to be flying it too. So I think there's as you say, there is that the client expectations and managing the relationship between the two parties. I mean, on all projects that's key, but in particular for airports, with that focus on the safety side of things.
Yeah,
so
I mean, I would just go on to say, sorry to interrupt you, I think I've just gone to say that you need to know within the airport who's responsible for what job, because the person who commissions the piece of work doesn't necessarily always give you all the information for who you need to contact for the kind of airside safety stuff. So that's really important.
Lovely. If you have any questions, can you put them into the Q&A section of Teams? That would be great. So here we go. 2 seconds. God. So in the Q&A, by preference, I can handle the chat too. What other outputs can be produced from the data capture?
Okay, so once we've got the point cloud, which is the sort of basis of the data we would have for this, it's possible if you wanted to do a BIM model or other aspects of 2D CAD from it. The same data could go into GIS, so you could have an author mosaic in a sort of a GIS platform with your terrain data, so digital terrain model or digital surface model as well. So once you've got that point cloud data, there's lots of other applications that spin across from kind of AutoCAD into GIS as well.
Adam asks, says that was really interesting. Was any consideration given to using fixed wing capture, which could have been quicker, or was the main driver the flexibility that the multi-copter capture could provide?
Yeah, we're not registered licensed to do fixed wing, but we felt that in terms of the ability for the M300 to cover the same amount of ground, and I think the flexibility, I mean, we considered working with a different partner to do it, if I'm being honest. But for this size of airport, I think that it gave us the right flexibility. I mean, typically we were flying for, in most instances, around about 20 minutes, and then we'd put down and, do it again. So there's a lot of stopping and starting, and I think, as I said, I think the M300 gives you that flexibility to be able to do that and move it around the site, because you don't necessarily capture data that was contiguous to each other. And I don't know with fixed wing or wing truck, I don't know what height you would need to fly at in order to get the same GSD, but I think it would be a different operation, but it could certainly be done with that.
The next one. Thank you, David, for a really interesting talk. It's great to hear how you've demonstrated how possible it is to work within the boundary of an airport. And I think that's absolutely crucial to understand that, both from airport points of view, because obviously there have been issues with drones in the past, and airports are rightly very cautious around allowing drone operations in and around their space due to safety reasons. However, I think it's also fantastic to see how that you manage that safely and professionally as well with them. And I think that, as you mentioned, was that client relationship that you've built up over the time.
Yeah, and I think I'm just reading Jeremy's comment here that he's also done some airfield work as well on live airfields as well, and he's using fixed wing. I mean, we had a team of 3 or 4 operators there, so there was basically someone in charge of surveying, a pilot, a secondary pilot, and in addition to that, a spotter as well. And there is, as I think Jeremy's saying here, it took 6 months to plan his surveys. We didn't have 6 months, unfortunately, to be able to do this. But I think, Jeremy's right. With the biggest challenges you face are you're operating within the windows of when the airport deems it safe for you to operate. But the runway was the big challenge, and that was why we went there at basically 4 in the morning to capture that in the middle of the summer, because we knew we could have authority to fly the runway at that point, and there would obviously be no aircraft on the in that area as well.
What other briefs do you anticipate getting from airports?
Not really sure on that. I imagine that I hope that we will get similar work from different airports. I would have thought this technology allows some degree of apron inspection, and for that to be digitized. I mean, I know from Bristol Airport, the way in which they do their apron inspection now is it's all walked, and that's manually marked up, defects are marked up on maps. So I think that our data would allow that to be digitized in a slightly different way as well. But I suspect, like any large asset owner, a lot of airports just don't have asset information which is necessarily up to date, whether that's topo maps or 3D building information as well. So hopefully we can work with some airports to help them capture that data and do it a bit cheaper for them as well.
Indeed, and as costs are rising, this is also sort of another key factor at the moment. A different Christopher asks, how did you communicate with the air traffic tower? Did you have a person in the tower on a radio, or did you talk to air traffic direct? And also, was it pre-arranged at what points you could make contact?
We were working with the airside ops team, so we were continually escorted in a vehicle. So we'd have our kit in the back of the vehicle, we'd get out and fly it, and airside ops would be our relay person into the tower. So we would work with the person from airside ops who was constantly with us to communicate with the tower. So they would be our sort of our spokesperson, as it were, our means of communicating with the tower. We didn't do it directly through a headset, if that's what you're asking, because I don't think the tower would have wanted that.
I was going to say, was that something that they suggested or you suggested?
Yes. Yeah, we assumed that we would have been able to talk directly to them, and they said no. We want you to go through our member of staff, and that's partly because we wouldn't have the right language to be able to necessarily communicate in the way that they would want us to, because remember, they're talking to pilots at exactly the same time, and so we needed to work with them on that. But as we were continually escorted, it didn't matter. It worked fine from that perspective.
Ideal. Well, that's extremely positive as well, to know that they sort of understand that there might be communication issues on the day. Do we have any further questions? Please do ask, because this is a great opportunity to do so. And as I say, I'm very apologetic that we haven't been able to record it today. David has kindly offered to do so again and share the PDF of the slides as well. Hang on, in chat, what is the turnaround time for permissions from the CAA?
Typically on a piece of work like this, you'd want to allow 3 to 4 weeks, but our experience is that they normally turn it around within a week or so. But I think you'd tell the client it would take 3 to 4 weeks, so that you don't overshoot expectations.
That's it, yes, indeed. Another comment from Jamie. Thank you, David. Really good insights. And another Jeremy has said, the surprise for me was that these airfields have never been drone surveyed before. Out of people here already, Jeremy, you've already mentioned that you've surveyed other airfields. Do we have others who have surveyed airfields? And I wonder whether we have an up-to-date list somewhere of these, of the UK airfields, and B, whether they have been surveyed. If anyone does know, do please contact me separately via membership@arpas.uk. That's just a sort of a point of interest from my point of view, more than anything else. Lovely. Well, any more questions? Not at the moment. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Heathrow was done, I think, last year, Jeremy is saying. And I've got another comment coming through as well. Glasgow are doing test flights for drone in a box. Now, is interesting as well. As to how that will operate. That will be an interesting one. What sort of things would you anticipate there with the drone in a box side of things and coordinating in with flights and more?
I think that's I think, Eleanor, that's a 𝗃𝗶𝗀𝗄 project. And I think they're looking for solutions for foreign object debris on the runways at regular intervals, because at Bristol they drive up and down every couple of hours to look for any artifacts on the runway, pieces of metal. But I think 𝗃𝗶𝗀𝗄 are looking to automate that solution with a drone in a box solution that's going to fly up and capture the data. So that's what I understand by it.
Gotcha. Yes, it is. It's an interesting one as to whether I guess if you send a drone up, that's fantastic and it can be seen very quickly. But if you send a person in a car, then at least they can pick something up along the way if there is anything there. It's a sort of the flip side between the two, isn't it? But really interesting. I shall take a look and look into that more. It sounds an interesting project. If we have no more questions and we have no more comments, I shall end the webinar shortly. Thank you very much, David. That was, as I mentioned, really insightful, really interesting.
Happy to do it.
And thank you for talking us through so much detail behind doing it, because I think that's sort of the crucial angle to take when looking at and understanding how these projects can happen. And I wish you all very well for the rest of the day and the week. And do please stay in touch for further webinars in the future. Okay, thank you very much then, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.